Hey, Skulls and Shadows, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for this very special episode of podcast from the Twilight world. Today's guest is a man as synonymous with German heavy metal as the bands whose album covers he created. I'm talking, of course, about Andreas Marschall, the legendary cover artist, best known to us bards for the covers of Nightfall and Middle-earth, Imaginations from the Other Side, Somewhere Far Beyond, Tales from the Twilight world. But the excitement doesn't stop there, because joining us on this journey through the dark is friend and fellow artist, Felipe Machado Franco. I think you're really going to appreciate his insights into the artistic process. I think you're really going to enjoy what Andreas has to say. And I really hope you enjoy this episode, my friends, featuring two artists who together have done more Blind Guardian artwork than any person on this earth. So without further ado, my friends, welcome. Hello, Guardians of the Blind and Travelers in Time, and welcome. I, as always, am your humble bard. Today I am joined by my co-host here, Felipe Machado Franco, the well-known cover artist for Blind Guardian, and with us today is a man who needs no introductions, the seer of sacred visions himself, Andreas Marschall. Welcome, Andreas.
Hi, nice to meet you.
I want to jump right into it here, Andreas. So, you've obviously, you're well known for, the covers that you've done for Sodom, Crater, Obituary, Hammerfall, and of course, Blind Guardian, which we're here to talk about today. But before we get into all that, I kind of want to start back at the beginning. As I understand it, your parents were both artists, is that right?
Yeah, they were art teachers.
Okay.
They taught arts in the school, and they taught geography and arts, and they were painters as well. And I remember that I even had 1 year of school with my mother as a teacher, and they told me that I started drawing when I was a baby. When I was five years old or so, or 4 years, I started to draw comic strips, and so it must have been some talent which came from my parents. Yeah, and I was always influenced by art, but mostly by comic strips.
Really?
I started. I was very much into comic strips because in the 60s, in the middle of the 60s, my parents went to America. It was an exchange of teachers. American family came to Germany, and my parents went to USA in New York, and we spent 1 year in USA in a time when in Germany people not even had a refrigerator or TV. I as a little boy, a German boy, went to America in the middle of the 60s and saw this fantastic world of TV series, of comic books everywhere, and it was like a wonderland for me. So I was very early influenced by American media, like the Donald Duck, Superman, Batman, and all this stuff.
Really?
Yeah.
So given that you you had this experience, and like you said, you had even had your mom as an art teacher in school at some point, was there like a piece of advice that really stood out to your parents that you kind of held with you through this year that really helped in your art?
I think they mainly they encouraged me. This is the best thing was that they always really appreciated what I did, and they saw my talent, and they really gave me support all the time. And yeah, it was for me. It was very clear that this will be my direction, the artistic. The artistic direction would be my life, not the mathematics or anything like this. It would be the visuals thing and the fantastic thing, and so. And my parents really supported this.
Is that a similar experience to you, Felipe? Like, were your parents were also involved in the arts as well, right? Was it a similar process?
Yeah. In a way, my mom, she's a philosopher. My dad is in engineering. I'm the youngest of four, but they always encourage art classes outside of school or schools that had an art curriculum. From my brothers, well, my two brothers are architects, and in a way, they went into drawing and painting.
Mm-hmm.
And but I also wanted to ask you, Andreas, from that time. We're talking about the early beginnings of your career. Any particular literature, books, or music that you know that in a way influenced your storytelling, creating worlds back in that time?
Yes, I think when I started being interested in fantasy and horror stuff and so, my biggest influence was a group called The Studio, which was Bernie Wrightson, Barry Windsor-Smith, and Michael Kaluta, three artists who joined forces in a studio in, I think it was in New York. And these guys were my gods. I absolutely am influenced by these persons. You see, in the way I work with details, I absolutely crazy about details, and this comes from Barry Windsor-Smith, and the way I paint certain faces and expressions come from Bernie Wrightson. And I think I would say in this book, The Studio, about this artistic collaboration in the 70s was the biggest influence for me. And on the other side, of course, Hieronymus Bosch is a very big influence for me, because the art of churches, inside the churches, very dark, mystical paintings of hell and stuff, was always impressing for me. And even as a little child, I was very impressed by these monsters. And so you see on the dark side of
that's so. Yeah, it's really awesome to hear.
Yeah.
When we were in a way designing the structure of this gathering, this interview with you, I mentioned this. Like one of the things that has always driven me into your artworks from the very start when I discovered you is that the level of detail that you put into your surface design. Like, for example, we were talking about the backgrounds on your Nightfall and Middle-earth artwork, and the level of detail on the architecture it's amazing. And now that you just mentioned where does it come from, you just answered my top one question that I had for you. Thank you.
Actually,
awesome.
It's interesting to me, the architecture inspired you quite a bit too, because I think I read in an interview you gave that you're especially inspired by old Europe, specifically the balance between the political atmosphere and the philosophical aspect of all that. Is there a piece or a cover in particular that sums up this idea best?
Yes. I think Nightfall on Middle-earth, there is a lot of reference to the German cinema of the 30s, before the before Nazi Germany started. There's this expressionistic architecture in the background, you know, this this cathedral-like palace and the throne, and it's very, very detailed, and it's totally totally inspired by totalitarian architecture. You know, I remember my first encounter with Lord of the Rings with Tolkien. Wasn't really Lord of the Rings, but it was a sort of homage by Ralph Bakshi. It's an animation movie called Wizards. And do you know it?
I'm not familiar with it.
It's almost the story of Lord of the Rings, but it's more an homage. And this director, this animation director called Ralph Bakshi, he later did a version of Lord of the Rings. But before he did this small underground movie, and here he mixed images of the dark wizard, like in Lord of the Rings, with imagery from Adolf Hitler, from the Nazi Germany. He just blended it into each other, and he used original documentary footage, which he superimposed with animation art, and this impressed me very much, because Nightfall on Middle Earth you can see as a symbolic imagery of totalitarian power.
Interesting. So just moving back to the back to you, after you had worked, I believe you worked for a French magazine called the Metal Hirand. Is that right?
Yes, it's the French word for heavy metal.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I understand you started as a comic artist for that, but you somehow came in touch with a fella named Karl Walterbach. Is that? Yes, am I saying that right? No, I understand that sort of opened up your world to doing different covers and stuff like that, and what would lead to Blind Guardian. But from my understanding, you were actually involved in the metal scene in Germany much before that.
Right.
Even.
Yeah.
Was there ever any talks about doing an album cover prior to meeting Karl?
I first started in the beginning of the 80s. I started with drawing comic stories, graphic novels. Also for this magazine, heavy metal and underground magazines. The problem was that the way I painted this comic strips was as detailed as I painted my artworks later. It was all very photorealistic, and it took me ages to finish a page of comics, because I was so much influenced by film and cinema, and I wanted everything to look real and three-dimensional, and it was just not possible to do this in comics, because it took ages, and that it wouldn't pay. I wouldn't have the possibility to be paid for this amount of work. And so I one day had to decide I have to make single artworks. And when I came to Berlin in the beginning of the 80s, to a very strange and very underground Berlin, there was still the big wall, and there were riots in the streets, and it was a total crazy city then. It was an island in communist Germany, and there was only this one island, of a totally crazy party city that never slept. And I came there because I didn't want to go to the army. And this was for a German man, it was a possibility to go to Berlin, and then you didn't have to go to the army. And so I went into this totally crazy town full of punk and metal and everything, and underground and parties. And I started doing little underground jobs for underground magazines and stuff like this. And one day I went to a comic shop, and there I met a guy who was interested in horror stuff and so, and we started talking, and it turned out to be Karl Walter Bach. And I said, yeah, I'm painting. And he said, I need very cruel stuff. It should be a scandal. It should be really yeah, it should be a scandal. He wanted a scandal painting. I said, okay, I can do that. So I did my first very terrible metal cover. It was a sampler called Rock from Hell, I think. Yeah, and it was terrible, but it was Satan. A satanic person with a woman in his arm, and which he raped and stuff like this. Very, very rough stuff. But Karl was very satisfied with it, and because we always shared the same interest into horror films, mainly gory cannibal movies and Italian horror films and zombie films and everything. We just got along very well, and I did the next one, which should be a scandal painting. It was called Death Metal. It's a sampler called Death Metal. I did it under a different name. I did it under the name Freudstein, which is a person out of a zombie movie.
That's your work. Noise Records, right?
Yeah, right.
That's you.
Yeah. It's awesome. Very, very gory. And this time it worked because they really banned it. And Karl was, oh yes, great. And yeah, this was my first job for him. And then I started doing more subtle stuff, and I got in touch with Sodom and with Miller from Creator and stuff like this. This was my entrance into this.
Was Changing Times for Mania around that time?
Yes.
That was the blue cover, I believe. You were showing, yeah, very beautiful with the hand coming up.
Yes, right.
Yeah, wow. That's cool. And it's crazy to think that's early on in your career too. Like,
yes. Yeah.
So this would lead eventually to your work with Blind Guardian as well, right? I mean, it's through the same gentleman. Now, from my understanding, in an article that I read for Rock Hard magazine, it said that you were working on a shorter logo for Blind Guardian before you did Tales from the Twilight World. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I didn't understand. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Yeah. The magazine said that there was a shorter sort of text logo. I think Hansi was talking about that they had originally approached you with doing some way of shortening Blind Guardian. But really? We never actually saw that. And I was just kind of curious if you could tell us about it a bit.
Oh, I don't remember that. I really don't remember it.
You've done a lot of art. Yeah, that's fair. So rather than focusing on the text logo, I got a different question I'd like to ask you if I could. So Tales from the Twilight World obviously is is one of the namesake of the podcast and stuff. So it's the cover in particular is what drew me to that album. I read somewhere that you said, because obviously we've touched on your love of movies, right? I've heard you say that when you paint, you feel like you're painting for the big screen. Can you tell us what you saw in this scene in particular with the cover of Tales from the Twilight World?
Well, this is very influenced by 60s Italian fantasy films by Mario Bava and stuff. The way the lighting, the colors are very typical for 60s. You call this genre Sandal movies. You know that? It's
Okay.
about historical monumental films and fantasy films, which they shot in Rome in Cinecittà, and the lighting is very typical for this. When you look closely to this, a moment. Yeah, it's a typical contrast between blue code light and artificial studio lighting. You know, it's when I painted it, I had very much in my head that this might be a film set, and it's a little bit built like a film set, you know, and it's all very realistic. But the lighting is realistic in a studio way, you know. It's not a naturalistic approach, but it's more like watching a fantasy film, especially from the 60s. You understand?
Yeah, I do. I never I never really occurred, because I'm obviously, Felipe would understand this probably a lot better than I would, because to me, when I saw it, it comes across as very fantasy, and I could sort of pick up on like subtle concepts of, like kind of the fire and all this, but I never would have understood composition in something like, Mr. Machado would there.
Another thing.
This is like the.
Another very interesting thing is when you look at this guy here, that's me.
What?
Awesome.
This is my face here.
Awesome.
You're kidding. Really? That's
and that's the thing that is typical for my way to work. I used to work with models and shot friends and girlfriends and made photographs to find the right position. But mostly I used myself as a model. And I used to make photographs of myself, which in the beginning was a bit difficult. But now my technique now to find the right pose for the creatures in my artworks is that I make a film of myself. I set up a camera, a digital camera, then I dress up with stupid things. It looks very ridiculous. I have a stick in my hand instead of a sword and stuff like this. And I start acting this scene, not as single photographs, but as a video sequence. And I start acting different poses, and then I watch this video and I get exactly the right pose I'm looking for. And this I make as a still photo and use it as a model for my artworks. And that's why almost every creature you have in my artworks based on me. Of course, I changed the face and everything, but even the dwarfish creatures or the demons, they are always based on me.
Really?
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's fascinating.
Man, this is like the coolest art class that I always wanted to have. Thank you. Oh man, amazing. No, the drama and the dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
you can see them the dynamic on what you're telling us, it's clearly visible on your artworks, on the characters for sure. Amazing.
So, Andres, I want to ask too. There is so much going on in this scene. Obviously, you use yourself for the models and stuff like that, but the inspiration for the objects, specifically, the one I want to touch on is the mandolin. If you look in the background, like I noticed while I was, staring at it for a long period of time, that almost the Imaginations mandolin, that sort of one from that the Sandman's playing, makes an appearance on this album in the background. Was that intentional or is that more incidental?
I don't really recall who had the idea for this mandolin, but a very typical element of all my artworks are musical instruments or machines, strange machines. It's a little bit antique looking, medieval looking, steampunk looking. I'm very obsessed with mechanical stuff and with musical instruments, and so I also every weekend I go to the flea markets and buy old stuff, old writing machines and old telephones or stuff like this, because I'm very fascinated by mechanical, technical instruments, and I really loved to construct this this mandolin. It's very, very detailed when you look at it. It's there is wood and metal and leather, and it's all blended in a way that could be realistic. It possibly could function, and yeah, it was one of these typical obsessive instruments that I constructed, and I think it must have been Hansi's idea to use it again and again. I don't really remember how this instrument came up, but I think it was Hansi's idea, and I just developed it.
Really? Yeah, I was curious because it's just subtly in there, so I definitely wanted to ask you. Felipe, what did you notice, being an artist yourself, about this cover in particular?
Which one?
Okay. We're talking about Tails, right?
Tails, yeah.
Oh, it was for sure. Maybe probably after I discovered the Imaginations album, one of the first artworks that I discovered from you, and definitely the light impacted me, and how you make sure that the viewer will always recognize main characters because of the backlighting that you use, which is so unique and particular and specific in your style. And I also noticed we were talking about machinery and the elements that come and go. And I always found fascinating that I call it a time machine. I don't know if it's a time machine that you can see on somewhere far beyond. You can see it again on your back cover for Imaginations. And I always found it fascinating, the timeline that you created for the band, the connecting points in terms of narrative, in that sort of details. It's something that you don't see in other bands, and you make sure of it. It's something really, really special.
Yeah, I think it fits very well to the band, because the band is a very narrative band. Each each record is a movie for me. Each Blind Guardian record has so much elements of soundtrack, film soundtracks, and it creates so much inner visions when you hear this music. It's not just speed metal, also it's very symphonic soundtrack music for me. And this is mirrored in the artworks I did for them. A very important thing is, especially at Imaginations, that I wanted to invite the viewer to enter this world. The front cover and the back cover. The back cover is much too detailed than you would normally do for a back cover. You know, it's totally crazy to do something like this. You know, I really painted with a magnifying glass. I have this magnifying glass, and it's a pity that I don't have the original anymore, because I sold it to an art collector recently. But when you look at the original, it's big like this. You can see a little dollhouse, and in this dollhouse you see every little room, and it's really painted with a magnifying glass. I was totally obsessed by these details, and when you see it in a bigger size, in the size of a record at least, then you can make a magic trip into this artwork. You can listen to the music, and you can watch very, very long, and you will always find a new element.
Right.
So it's a sort of narrative art for me.
Now, I was wondering about your originals, if you were in general able to keep your originals, or do you have to do the record companies?
No, generally I always kept the originals, despite some cases where they just disappeared when in the printing studios, or somebody just lost it. There are a couple of artworks which just went lost, especially in the early in the 80s. You had to send the originals to the USA, for example. I did an artwork for King Diamond, and I had to send them the original, and somewhere in the USA that got lost, which is a big loss for me because I like this artwork. But most of the other artworks I kept. I still have them, or I sold them to collectors. There are a couple of art collectors who have a lot of artworks from me. Do you want to see an original?
Please.
Oh, that would make that would make my day.
Man, yes.
Oh my God.
So this is the size of an original.
Wow.
Oh no.
And that's the original live?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
I hope you see the details. I hope it comes across.
Oh man.
You might need to send it down here, just so we can get a closer look at it, Andreas.
But
no, I want to ask.
There's a lot of detail here.
When I'm looking at it now, I see for live, there's almost like a cycle from the front of that cover to the back, where you've got the moon and then the stars, but just in the distance you can almost see like daybreak. Is there like a consistent idea behind that, or is it more of like an atmospheric thing?
It's again, it's the invitation into a fantastic world. It's, I mean, the front cover is pretty clear. You're invited into this party in this Bards tavern. On the background, there is an old city, and there are streets, and you can go very, very far into the landscape, and there is the morning coming up. And when you watch this, you can really have a magic trip into this imaginative world, and it's always very important for me. I just when I was very young, when I was a little boy in America, I remember one of my first books was a Disney book. It was a Pinocchio by Walt Disney, and it was illustrated by stills from the animation film Pinocchio, and I was totally fascinated because it was this realistic animated world with old city and this bluish light and narrow streets. And I was really dreaming myself into this book. And I think this book, Pinocchio by Walt Disney, is one of my very early influences. And still a little bit of this is still present in the live artwork for Blind Guardian.
No, and the depth, the backgrounds in that movie, the way they created the long panoramic sequences, you can tell now that you showed us your original artwork for life. Now I'm gonna go back to the backgrounds of Pinocchio, and I can see the influence. Do you keep a copy of that book still?
No, unfortunately not. I was searching for it, but I didn't find it yet. But it was a book about the film Pinocchio, so it should be available somewhere. But I don't have it anymore. It was for 1963, so it's very a long time ago.
I'll have to keep
Do you
my eyes
have
open.
plans of publishing? Yeah. Do you have any plans of publishing a book with most of your work?
I was contacted from time to time by people who wanted to do it, and I would like to do it, but there's nothing concrete at the moment. But I'm thinking about it. Yes, sure. There are some books who came out recently, which have some chapters about me, like in Justice for Art, for example, is one of this book about metal artworks, and yeah, I should think about contacting people to do that. It should happen sooner or later.
While we're on the subject of live, Andreas, I wanted to ask you too, because I noticed as I was going through your catalog of what you did for Blind Guardian, this is really the only album cover where like the scene is kind of taking place, like we're invited into, but it's sort of taking place on the side. Like when you think about like Tales from the Twilight World, there's Somewhere Far Beyond where it's like right front and center, but it's almost off to the side, like we're going to it. Is there a reason that you chose this?
I didn't understand. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, I noticed that on this cover in particular, like lots of the, I don't know if you'd call it dynamic, or lots of what's going on in the scene is happening within that Bards tavern, but the viewer is on the outside of the tavern. Was there a reason that you chose that?
Yeah, the reason was to invite the viewer to this party, to give him the feeling, oh, I want to be part of this party. I want to enter this, and I want to be there and drink some beers and with all the strange creatures. I think that's a charm of the artwork, because it's got so much. It's talking about live concert. Everybody wants to go to the live concert and so, but it's in a symbolic way. It's the live concert in the fantasy world.
put eloquently, because that's definitely like, I get that vibe from it. But I was curious because it's just different from when you think of like Nightfall, where everything's happening right in the center of a person's vision, right?
And Nightfall is not a place where you want to be. It's a really dark artwork.
Yes.
but the live one is a really positive cover, I think. It's a very positive atmosphere, and you really want to be part of this party there. But
speaking of Nightfall, I read that you said once that it best defines your technique and your style. Why is this one like a better personification of that than your other works?
I remember that I put very, very much effort of work in this artwork, because I was so much into the architecture of films like expressionistic era in Germany. A very famous film from this area is called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. It's a very
1919, right?
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah. And in this film, they had a lot of strange angles of architecture. They painted the shadows to the wall and so. And in a certain way, this atmosphere is present in Nightfall, because you have this this architecture which looks like lightnings, and I really had fun to dream myself into this expressionistic world, and to incorporate my cinematic passion into this artwork. And so I spent a lot of time doing it. Again, when you look at this, it doesn't make sense for a CD cover, On a CD cover, you see only 50% of what I painted there. But when you look at the record, it's you have a better chance to see all the little details and a lot of characters also. I painted a lot of characters there. And when Blind Guardian was on tour, they printed extremely big tour posters with this artwork, and this was really impressive. When I went in the streets and I saw a house wall filled with this artwork, then I said, okay, this is the big screen, the big screen it belongs to. And the characters were life size, and I saw in this size, I saw more than I remembered that I painted, and this was really, really fascinating. I'm still searching for this for this poster, because they just used it for the tour, and then it vanished. And I was I didn't get a copy from it, but this would be really great if you some of you one day meet somebody who has this poster. Just tell me, because I want to buy.
Well, we'll ask, right now, the Bards. So call out to the community. If anybody has seen these posters, let Andreas know for sure.
Yeah. It was really impressive. It was like seeing the artwork in a big movie theater. That's where it belongs to.
So interesting. Felipe, what did you find, like, as an artist? Was there anything in particular that kind of sparked your curiosity about this cover?
Oh, everything about it. I mean, we're talking about Nightfall, right?
Yeah. Yes.
No, the depth of the space, the story going on. I wasn't that familiar into the Silmarillion back then, but it pushed me into Tolkien. the finding out the moment of the story, what was going on, and the way it connects with the narratives and the cinematography feel of the entire album, where you can locate the characters in a way and give them a face and a design. It opened an entire image that goes into the music as a soundtrack in a way. So everything about it made a huge impact. I also love to go into the back and see all the details, the little caves in the back, the whole structures, the how particular the architecture there. I mean, you really created a space that it's out of this world, that holds up. I mean, you can trust the architecture. You feel that it holds up, but then when you try to locate it on a certain time period, you're not able to, because it doesn't belong to any time period. So it's we call it in Spanish, we would say atemporal, out of time.
Right.
But enough recognizable enough to trust that it holds up. But then again, it takes you time to realize. When this record came out, I was probably 17 years old, or maybe 18 years old, just going into art classes and art faculty. And I remember at some point at a history class to write and analyze a piece of art that we would admire. And I did that homework based on some of your works.
Really?
And the teacher told me, like, yeah, there's a lot of reference here, like go back into medieval architecture, and because I can see on his work this and that. And back then he pushed me to analyze what I'm mentioning now. That before that I just loved the artwork, but then you go deep into it and you start to reconstruct the archaeology of what you imagine went through your mind in terms of the world building. And world building, from my point of view, and I'm sure from many of the people that follow you, as a part of you being an artist, your capacity of world building is what really captivates me into all of the work that you create.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Andreas, I want to ask you as well, while we're on the subject of Nightfall, Tolkien is such a well-known artist. Was there like a specific element or character that you were especially critical of, that you found really difficult to capture in this piece?
Not really. I think the biggest challenge was to create an atmosphere of totalitarian violence, of totalitarian power, and by connecting the design of the throne, of the character, and the world, the architecture. I think this was the biggest challenge, and because I didn't want to repeat the images which I had seen about this scene, like in the Ralph Bakshi movie, Lord of the Rings, or illustrations in books, and so I didn't want to copy this. I tried to find an original vision of this scene, and this was the biggest challenge for me. Creating the characters wasn't so difficult. It was no
on
problem.
that note too, was there ever a point, like you mentioned, there's this sort of totalitarian kind of like a very clear air of danger about it, but when you look at Luthien, you know, the elf who's dancing in front of Morgoth, there's almost like a serenity to her. Was there ever worried that would pull focus from the atmosphere you were trying to create?
I think it's when you have such a element of beauty and this delicate person, it makes the power and the violence of the totalitarian atmosphere even stronger. You need the contrast, and without Luthien, something would be missing. It's all centered around her. It's all a threat, and it's all the horror of the scene comes from the contrast between the delicate dancer and the dark and totalitarian atmosphere around it.
Interesting.
I think it's always very important to have contrasts in an artwork, because this is what sticks to your imagination when you have very strong contrasting elements.
And it's interesting too, because now that that I've actually had the opportunity to speak with you, you can definitely see the influence, that, like you said, German expressionist film has had on your pieces, and how it's kind of shaped it. I want to, since we're running just a bit low on time here, but I want to make sure that I asked, because you have done so much with film in your artwork that eventually led to you even directing. You've been involved with several collaborations, but the two that stick out in particular are your two films that you directed, Tears of Cully and Masks as well. Where did these ideas come from? Why did it have to be horror in particular? I mean, like, there's a lot of beauty in film and a lot of different ways you can go in film that still expresses a lot. Why did you choose horror as a medium?
I think that horror is the genre in which you invite the viewer into an imaginative world, and it works like no other genre. It works in this hypnotizing way in which my artworks also work. I always want to fascinate my audience, and I do this in my artworks. I do it with color, with perspective, with details. In my films, I do it also with colors, with lighting, and a lot with music. Music is extremely important in my films, especially in Masks. The music was done by Sebastian Lebermann, the singer and chief of the band Orden Ogan. And it's like my artworks. It's a very oppressive atmosphere, and very hypnotizing, mesmerizing atmosphere. And I started working with films the first time when I did the videos for Coma of Souls for Creator. I did music videos, and during the 90s I shot about 100 music videos for metal bands and some pop bands, and this gave me the opportunity to connect my love for atmosphere with music, and this led to my movies then. And for me, it's very important. When I draw an artwork, it's a very lonely job. I work very long on details, and I'm listening to music, but I'm on my own. I'm always concentrated on my work, but it's a lonely job. When you shoot a film, it's the total opposite, because you've got a big team of people around you, and there is a new challenge every day, and a lot of problems, a lot of hectic and a lot of stress. But you have a team which works together, and you have to lead this team, this team of people, of talents to a certain goal, and it's completely different type of work, and I needed both. It makes me complete to do both. So when I'm on the film set, I'm challenged by a high level energy of work, and I have to improvise all the time and have to be quick about anything. And when I work on an artwork, it's like a meditation. I know everything is safe and I can meditate on my artwork. And I take my time for each artwork. I don't do an artwork when a band says, it has to be finished in 1 week. I would not do it because I know that I couldn't take my time to work meditative on every detail.
That's wow. I'm just kind of floored by the connection that you have with both mediums. It's very easy for someone to see, you know, art as a different sort of visual medium than, you know, because there's a story element and, like you said, music and so many other atmospheres that, you know, as much as someone can interpret that from art, you don't hear it necessarily, right? So it's very interesting to me that it's such a close connection for you.
Mm. That's a thing that was missing when I painted comic strips and graphic novels. I always missed the soundtrack. When I painted, I listened to music, but I knew when my audience will read it, they will not have the same music. And this was always a problem for me when I did comic strips. I remember I once found a comic book in America. It was a Conan comic, and they had a little record in this comic, and so you were supposed to put on the record. And each end of each page there was a little gong, a little things, and you had to no, on the record there was a gong, and then you had to turn the page. That's how it worked. And so you had a comic book and you had a soundtrack, and this was for me. This was great, and but it never really got. It wasn't very successful. It was a very odd thing. But in my films, I have this possibility to connect images with films, and you know, it's a very satisfying experience when you watch your film in a big movie theater with some 100 people. You know, it's totally amazing. You sit there and you hope, oh, will they be shocked at the right moment? Will they laugh at the right moment? Will they be caught by the suspense and stuff? And you feel like they react, and it's totally great experience. And I traveled, especially with masks. I traveled all over the world. It was about 50 film festivals. I got invited to about 50 film festivals, and for me, this is totally different from painting, but I really don't want to miss it anymore, because it's so great. It has a lot to do with the experience of being a musician on the stage, I think, you know.
Well, I wish, you know, there's so many, it opens up like a Pandora's box of a million questions and stuff, but I know you're on a time limit. So I just want to ask, Felipe, do you have any other questions for Mr. Marschall here?
Oh no, just to give you a big thank you, because it was a window to many answers to questions that I had since I was in high school. Thank you so much for your time today. I don't have to remind you Yeah,
was
no,
great
the
to meet
level
you too.
It's a pleasure to meet you
of
too, sir.
admiration that I have. Yeah, and hopefully this is not the last time that we can do something like this. I dream of someone doing an event where some of us metal artists could gather someday. Like if the
Right.
bands have their festivals, maybe we
Yeah.
can someday have an art festival devoted to metal, right?
Yeah. A
And
great
maybe, yeah,
exhibition would be great. With
yeah, 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 yeah.
metal
We have to
artists.
make it happen, and I think it's after all of this madness passes, something like that definitely should happen. And I know of some people that you probably also know the dream of this, also the publishers promoting metal art now with their magazines and their books. That's the right people to put something like this together. So I hope that we will be able to meet in person someday. But thank you
Yes.
so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for.
Andreas, before we go, are there any projects you have on the horizon that you can share with us?
Yes, I'm painting at the moment a couple of artworks, but I wish I could show you the unfinished paintings, but the bands are very specific about it. They don't want to show anything before it's really finished. I'm writing screenplays, and maybe there will be a streaming program, but nothing which I can really promise for sure at the moment. But there will be a lot of artwork coming up in the next months.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I guess this closes another chapter in podcast from the Twilight World. We'd like to thank Andreas Marschall so much for coming on and sharing his time with us. Felipe, thank you for coming on and joining me for this interview as well. For those of you that are curious about Andreas, he has a fantastic website set up. I believe it's called marshall-arts.com. And of course, links to that down in whatever description you're reading, whether this be on a streaming platform, YouTube, wherever you get this episode. But with that, let's leave it to the memories and kiss the wind goodbye.
Okay, thank you.
Podcast from the Twilight World would like to thank Acoustic Guardian for providing the breathtaking cover of And Then There Was Silence, my wife April Bell for designing the cool crest and logo for the podcast, and of course all the bards from the Twilight World, and those listening, thank you.
Still the wind blows, calm and silent, carries news from the dead.